Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's Fireside Creators. I am your host, Reverend Dr. Sherry Pallas. For this week's show, I am chatting with Matt Hartley about how diversity is sacred. Please remember to keep all comments and questions related to the show topic and that this is a safe space. I want to give a shout out to all of our top sponsors, Ruth, Kirsten, Ray, Michelle, Heidi. Thank you all so much for your contributions and supporting the show. If you would like to support the show, you can go to sherrypallas.com and then look for the support tab, and then you'll see all that. Thank you for joining us, and I look forward to all of your comments and questions. If you are watching on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe. If you're on Facebook, grant StreamYard access so we can see your name when you have a comment or a question. I really appreciate all of your support, and thank you for inviting us and welcoming us into your home and joining this conversation. I appreciate you all. Okay, let's meet our guests and get smarter. Matt Hartley is a leading interfaith professional in Northeast Florida and a career educator. He has served as a youth minister and public high school teacher. Matt is a Christian shaped by Celtic spirituality and liberation theology and is a proud dad and husband. Hello, Matt.
Hi, Sherry. It's so good to be with you here tonight.
Thank you so much for joining us. And thanks to Tim for hooking us up for this show.
Yeah, our mutual Jacksonville friend.
Yes. And hello, David. Good to see you. Matt, you came to me because of the differences you're trying to make in Florida and across the South. And I would probably be limiting you by even saying that. You're trying to change the world like I am. And to see that diversity now is such a hot topic just kind of makes my brain explode. So tell me what you're doing. Tell me all of the things and what you're doing to make a difference in our world.
Yeah. So for the last 5 years, I've been leading the University of North Florida Interfaith Center in Jacksonville, Florida.
And what is Interfaith? Let me stop you there.
Interfaith. So Interfaith is bringing together people of different religions or even of religious and non-religious diversity together for conversation, celebration, basically friendship, and maybe even common action to make the world better.
Okay.
So Interfaith at UNF has recently been a part of our diversity and inclusion initiatives. And so we sit alongside a women's center, an LGBTQ center, an intercultural center. And so we get to interact in that incredible milieu of diversity on our campus. And unfortunately, as you alluded to, and as many people know, that kind of diversity work on public university campuses in Florida has come under attack from our state legislature and from our governor. And so a law was passed. And so now we're trying to figure out how to do our work as this new law limits and restricts what we can do with diversity.
Freedom, huh?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's especially for it to be coming from the religious crowd just blows my mind. I mean, to look at nature and think that it's monochromatic or a lack of diversity is just so out of touch. I mean, you cannot go, if you truly look at anything you walk on or anywhere you are, the amount of diversity that's in every aspect of our life could blow our minds. I mean, you can just, Jainism is focused on the essentials of all of life.
Mm-hmm.
And for the evangelicals to deny that aspect of our entire existence, I just don't get it. I mean, it's a fear, it's a bigotry. How do we overcome this?
Yeah. Well, Sherry, you know what's so interesting about the history of the Interfaith Center at UNF is that some evangelical groups were actually a part of advocating for the Interfaith Center in the first place.
Fantastic.
And
Okay.
so when we talk about a particular, and it's major, but it's a politicized evangelicalism.
Yeah.
There are those who have separated themselves from that and have always kind of gone to the side of that and said, like, people may consider us conservative, but we will live alongside people who are different than us. So whether it's our Reformed University Fellowship, we've had our, Campus Crusade is famously very evangelical, fairly conservative, but has been involved with the Interfaith Center. And
Okay.
I spoke to their campus minister just a couple of weeks ago, and he just I told him what was going on, and he kind of shook his head and said, I just wish this wasn't happening.
This just makes my heart jump. This is fantastic news.
Yeah, it's possible. Now, that doesn't mean that it's still easy, because I have a feeling that friend also probably voted for some of these folks that put these laws in. So then that's why we have to have relationships, though, across that difference, where we can then have the conversation and say, this is the impact when these kinds of leaders weaponize diversity. And I think there's an opportunity to bring people in who are more conservative and want to be able to be that way, but understand that is contingent upon other people being able to be different in themselves and having a space and, the dignity of their identity also. So that's kind of the wiggle space where we're trying to do some work.
Well, and I want to share with the audience what we're up against. As I was preparing for this show and going through everything, this was at the top of the YouTube search for diversity. And it says, ethnic diversity weakens society. It is not a strength, research shows. NCF Immigration Conference. 2,000 comments, 93,000 views. And the 2,000 comments, from what I could find, were all in support of a lack of diversity. How diversity has been the greatest crime our nation has ever faced. The fact that people are brilliant talk. I mean, I wanted to vomit as I was looking at this, and really look at humanity as not even able to get along on this planet with our cohabitants. I mean, it's where that has to be beyond fear. That has to be beyond, get off my lawn. Where is this coming from?
Gosh, it is, I don't know. Is it social media? Is that part of the, is it?
God,
part?
Probably. Yeah.
I mean, I say that as someone who is notoriously way too online. And I know that friends, family would all call me out for that.
Yeah, me too.
But you see all those comments, and people have found this video that affirms their viewpoint, and they're piling on, and they're hiding behind a screen. And I'm wondering, how stuck people like that are in their heads and in a imaginary world that only exists in here. What it makes me think of is this morning I started reading a book by Ed Young, and it's about animal perception. And his whole idea is that, and this is the reality, that animal perception is so different than human perception. There's some things we hold in common, but so many different ways of perceiving the world that animals have that we don't. And so we miss something if we think we see it all and they don't see what we see. In fact, there's so much we can learn by getting out of our heads and what we can only see by ourselves or only imagine by ourselves. But it takes, being around other people. It takes some stimulus and
experience.
We all can get a little bit more like that behind the screen, I think.
Yeah, because I think that most of the creatures, except for humanity, understand that they need each other. They are a part of a system that needs that. I mean, I think of the spiders on the ground and the monkeys in the trees, and they all go after all of the different stuff. It is truly a system. And because of our egos, we think that we're above that. We think that, coercion and cohesiveness is beneath us. And literally destroying our entire society, civilization, our planet because of it. It's beyond human diversity. It's ignoring the diversity of our entire universe.
And that's so recently I've been speaking a lot about sacred diversity. And I go right to that idea of how it is written into the universe, how it is written into all created things, and not just the diversity of humanity, but the diversity of things. And I love this example from biodiversity of trees and how trees work together. And forest ecologist Suzanne Simard has shown that trees, they cooperate. They're exchanging resources and they're communicating through fungal networks. And some of them mother over other trees, providing those resources. Although I think it's fair to say, that there are trees that fight each other and that fight for resources, but then there are those that take care of each other. And so it just seems like there's always the choice, right? And in the natural world, maybe it's a little less of a conscious choice, but there's both happening. And then for us, there is that conscious choice of we can be the mothering trees. We can be the trees that live together, birch and fir and pine, in community together.
Well, and I think that it should be noted that those trees that fight, as you described it, are fighting for their own survival. When we think at this day and age and this technology and the abundance of our entire planet at this point that we need to fight for survival, I think that's what brings up this bigotry. It brings up the fear that we need to be that tree to fight for their survival, instead of looking as like, wow, we have a whole forest here. It's really going to be okay. Yeah.
And I think that goes so much to the idea of everybody being able to thrive. I'm a not in every election, but I've been a Bernie bro at times, along with my 90-year-old grandma. We did that together, and but one of the things I loved about Bernie Sanders' message was that one of the things he said is he could see the appeal that Donald Trump had to some people who were down and out. That wasn't Donald Trump's only constituency, but he says, I get it, because some of these folks are actually down and out. But they've been painted, they've been pushed into seeing who the enemy is, into being people who are different than them, rather than seeing that there's an issue of how we treat each other and how we share our resources. And so I just thought of that as you were saying, this survival. When we get pushed into that survival, man, we look for the enemy.
Yeah, I mean, and a lot of this religious derived anti-diversity is coming from fear, and it's coming from the religion that is supposed to be issuing love and love your neighbor. So again, my head just explodes with this type of stuff to say, no, this is the way it is. If God created all of this, and then to say that we should be divided, yet we're not. I mean, it is truly the antithesis of any type of God figure that we put in there to say it is anti. Like I said, that video just killed me. I mean, they are pastors up there saying that we should be divided, as opposed to saying, look what we can learn from each other. I mean, how disgusting this country would be without the diversity. I mean, my God, just the food alone. I'm not even a big fan of apple pie. So, it's a beautiful thing, but I think that it comes down to just unwilling and maybe too insecure for people to accept the differences.
Yeah.
I thrive on differences. When I meet people who are different from me, I want to learn all about them.
Mm-hmm.
And in turn, most of them go, whoa, you're too different from me. I don't want to share. So there's a level of insecurity there of not knowing, the amphibian brain of being afraid. So we have to use this love to get over this and appreciate the diversity.
Yeah.
So how do we do that?
Yeah. I think that understanding how to get through the barriers, how the love gets through the barriers is a big issue. So I think about, Jacksonville. We have, this is a segregated city. It's a city that has the scars of Jim Crow and, the histories of enslavement on it, right? So you have like the areas that were predominantly African American, the areas that are more predominantly white, and there's some areas that are a little bit more mixed, but you have some of those that are just stark contrast.
Yes.
And then you have the areas that more recently had that were Black centers of commerce that had interstates plowed through them, right?
Yeah.
So we have these histories of racism and xenophobia written on the landscape here. And I think if you go out to the west side of Jacksonville, you've got some folks out there who have always lived in that world. And there's like almost like a wall and a moat around it to some extent, at least culturally. And in interfaith work, I think of Ibu Patel, who's one of the great interfaith leaders, Interfaith America. He's written a book about interfaith leadership where he talks about, when the difference is a barrier, oftentimes it's this wall or this barrier that's been built up. And so people can't really see beyond it. They're not supposed to go outside of it. And everything in the culture is built around trying to keep that wall up and from much of anybody going out and much of anybody coming in. And so the answer to that for me, what I've been trying to do for a number of years is just the simple idea of interfaith friendship. Because I feel like there's a lot of things I can't go over and have a good argument with people about. An argument usually won't go well. But if I try to bring in friendship, and one example of this was several years ago, there's a kind of Southern Baptist mega church in town, and it's one of those that rebranded, that took Baptist out of the name.
Southern Baptist used to own Jacksonville.
And but now they're dropping the name like very often. And so, I knew the college pastor, and he was very open. He was involved with interfaith work on campus. And so I said, hey, can I bring my Jewish friend and my Palestinian Muslim friend, and can the three of us come and talk to you about our friendship? And it's like totally, it's not about convincing anybody that all these religions are right. That's not what our agenda is. Our agenda is to show that people who are different really can share our community together.
I love that.
I guarantee you that was maybe the first time and the only time that they have had an interfaith event at that Southern Baptist church. So those are the kinds of like trying to just get a little bit inside the walls and convince people that it's not enemies on the outside.
Totally. My friend Steve Slocum is doing the same thing in San Diego. He is literally bringing Christians into mosques and vice versa, trying to get the conversation started. And that's how we invoke the love, right? Just trying to show that we are humans, that we have these common grounds, and that if there is a God, if there is this superior, whatever we want to call it out there, that's what they really want. They really want us all to love each other like parents do. I mean, no parent would ever go, you know what, you guys should hate each other. Don't talk, don't get along. Whatever you do, one of you's right, and I'm not going to tell you who.
Yeah.
Can you imagine a parent saying that?
Right. Well,
we act like that. We act like spoiled little children going, no, I'm daddy's favorite and he hates you. And it really is so childish.
Yeah, so I have two kids, and as of this month, we have two teenagers in the house, which is
Oh dear,
quite
a
an
lot.
imposing thing. So far, we're doing well, but
Congratulations.
I don't think I've tipped to them which one of them is my favorite yet. So I think I'm still
Keep it
safe.
under wraps.
I haven't exposed the truth yet.
I wish that, I mean, I've done a lot of shows where it's the same thing of, we just need to talk. We just need
Mm,
to, realize that we are all in this together. And that, I mean, that's why I got my PhD in comparative religion. I wanted to find the
mm,
beauty in them all, because
yeah.
I could tell you before it what everything was wrong with it, but I wanted to see the beauty. I wanted to see why people were following this, not
Mhm.
to further their hate, not to further their bigotry.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that's where it tends to go. And again, it's sacred. That's why, we're talking about this, is because to use God or your theology or your religion or anything for a source of bigotry, abuse, exclusion
Hmm.
is the antithesis of what it's supposed to be.
Yeah. Yeah, and Sherry, I feel so lucky. I go back to first things for me in faith. So I was a preacher's kid. I can remember like going across the street. We lived in the parsonage, going across the street to the church for Sunday morning. My dad was the preacher, and I was your typical bad boy, getting gum in my hair in the pew, that kind of stuff. Actually, that's probably the most bad boy I ever was as a preacher's kid. I was
I did a
actually,
show on Preacher's Kids. You were nothing.
I no, I was, I am the goody, I'm the typical goody two shoes preacher's kid.
Okay.
Um, but I remember this. So this was small town Indiana, Christian Missionary Alliance Church, and I remember my first memory verse, and it's the same one that many of us learned: "For God so loved the world." And when I go back to that, I think as a 5-year-old, later on, people are like, well, that verse is actually about how you have to accept Jesus or you're going to. And I'm like, you know what? As a 5-year-old, you don't notice that at all. You know what you hear? You hear, for God so loved the world.
Mm-hmm.
And especially if you're surrounded by that love, right? If that love is embodied. And at the time, my parents were probably a little bit more, in some sense, conservative in their theology, but and more evangelical. But there's so much in the evangelical tradition. I kind of grew up a little bit inside of it, a little on the edges. There's so much of the love, if we can separate it out from some of the more toxic elements. And so I felt like I got that from my parents. I felt like they embodied that. They welcomed people into their home, the way they treated people. And we were small town Indiana, so we were not seeing a lot of difference right there in front of us. But when I arrived in more diverse places, I felt so ready because my parents and that church had taught me that, yeah, God loves the world, and that means everyone that's in it.
That
So
is
I
so
think that
beautiful.
made such a difference for me.
That should be the rule as opposed to the exception. I mean, I grew up in the evangelical church, and it was nothing like that.
Yeah, I know.
I mean,
Yeah.
that is my mission, is to restore love,
Mhm,
because that was never felt. That was
mhm,
never taught. It was truly, Jesus may come back today. You better be ready. Hell, you're going to burn.
mhm.
Division, exclusion.
Yep.
And I think a lot of the people in those congregations are the one that are posting these videos saying diversity is bad.
Yeah. Yeah. And I I feel lucky to have had that upbringing, and I see so many friends who weren't so lucky. And it's interesting. I've seen, I don't know what your story about, how far you feel like you've gone from where you were, but I have friends who I think for them, definitely, they're ex-evangelical. They had to
Yeah.
leave to be healthy.
Yeah.
And
Same.
and I'm like, yeah, I get it. Like that's even my dad actually converted to Buddhism 7 years
Oh,
ago,
wow.
years ago. And he very much, talks about how that journey just made sense for him, and it made more sense of the journey of his life that he'd been through than the Christian faith had ever been able to do for him. And so I teach comparative religion, and I was talking to my students about Buddhism today, and we talked about, suffering is real and there's a cause for it, and there's a way to address it, but it doesn't start with sin. Sin is not the starting point. And my students, they were struggling with that idea. They were like, sin's got to be the beginning point. They're like,
right?
No, it's not.
Yeah.
So I think for him, that was the way to find the sacredness within himself. Yeah.
So what proof do you have that it's sacred? I mean, I've talked a bunch of junk here saying, look, just go take a walk and you'll be able to see it. But what proof do you offer? So
I've got no proof whatsoever. Okay. All I have are some arguments. Okay. I love Genesis 1. I've been a nerd about the book of Genesis, and especially the first chapter of Genesis, for a long time. And at one time for me, it was very much a, how does this fit with science question? Mm-hmm. And I think many of us have gone through that journey of, is it 7 days, or are they ages with each day, or, and eventually for me, this awakening of this ancient poetry, right? And this ancient truth for the people that were telling it to each other, that God was in control over the chaos. And so one of the things that I think is incredibly beautiful and not as well known about Genesis 1 is that though Christians later came to think of creation being from nothing, in Genesis 1, it actually says that, the Spirit's hovering over the waters. There are ancient, primordial, chaotic waters in Genesis 1 before creation. And, this is the primordial state of non-being. And it's that into which God speaks light. And so it's this, undifferentiated chaos. And then God says the word, and that chaos becomes order. And the order is not just light, but dark, not just land, but water, not just one creature, but another and another and another. And then humans, not just one kind, but in Genesis 1, male and female, and then obviously much further beyond that. And I see the consonance with the Big Bang as well. I mean, I think
totally.
Right? The scientific narrative, a unified energy bursts out into manifold forms, matter of all sorts, solid, liquid, star, planet, and life here on Earth, maybe elsewhere. Mm-hmm. And that unquantifiably immense difference. And then I love quantum physics. So then the idea that maybe like string theory, right? The idea that it's all strings, like it's all unified at the bottom, but then above it's diversity. So we have unity in diversity. So I love connecting those ideas. I just think Genesis 1 speaks directly to what we see in the diversity of the world, and proclaims that it's sacred. And I think we can see in the universe almost a purpose for things to become more and more complex and more diverse.
Well, and the odd thing about it is, so there's not just one, and science is looking for the singularity of the start of the universe. Right. And then Genesis 1 originally said that it making man and woman like us. So then there went to a singularity, which totally prevents diversity. So once you buy into that there is a singularity in our universe, which is not true, everything has a duality, right? I mean, that's just the way that our universe is structured. So to think that one set of anything is correct is just a completely flawed theology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, where this really played out vividly for me earlier this year was I was on a trip in Germany with a campus ministry, and we were on kind of a Luther country tour, and we got to go to Mansfeld Castle, which is overlooking the city of Mansfeld, and which is one place that Martin Luther lived as a young person. And it's one of the places he might have been thinking of when he wrote "A Mighty Fortress Is Our God," was this castle that he looked up at. And the other two campus ministry groups that were with us were, your fairly typical Lutheran, fairly white, kind of monolithic groups, and they're very sweet. But this campus ministry from UNF, which my friend leads, and she invited me to participate. It is like she's cultivated this incredible diversity. And so there's like a Muslim student on the trip, and there's a Jewish student on the trip, and there's spiritual but not religious students on the trip. And the racial and ethnic diversity is also just wild. And here they are in this chapel, all of these humans of all of these diverse identities in this chapel together. And we did readings from the Hebrew scriptures and New Testament, but we also did readings from Harry Potter and from secular books. And so it was just like, yes, like it has to be a multiplicity here.
Yeah.
We have to speak to the multiplicity among us because it is because it is us.
Yeah.
And even if we don't put the word sacred on top of it, it is how we honor each other in that space together. So I totally agree with you. I think we limit ourselves when, even in understanding the Godhead. I mean, that's the idea of the Trinity to some degree, right? Is that to consider God just as a singularity limits. And so there's this dynamic quality to God.
Well, and there is a unification in our existence, which is noted by the Fibonacci spiral, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yet that unifying sacred geometry is seen across everything. It's seen in the most diverse ways. So when I was going through my studies, my deconstruction, all of that, it was like, okay, so where is the unification in religion? Which is why, again, I led towards comparative religion. And I thought across everything was love. And it was so simple, but the hardest thing in the world, right? I mean, if we could all just embody that, it would be heaven.
Yeah.
But again, to deny the unification, to deny the diversity is still unified, is to hate your neighbor. It's to be exclusive. It's to be in some really fucked up clique where they're going to send you to eternity and burn. There is no, I mean, we are supposed to be a cohesive family. We are supposed to be one under God. We are supposed to be even a united nation. And our egos and the need for division is just, it's just crushing us all.
Yeah. I love the dialogical model and of we can really only experience diversity through that which is in front of us and through that which we go to.
Yeah.
And so whether that, when we come to another person, it's also key for us to remember, like, even if we don't think that they're different than us, they actually are, right? Like, so the idea that this person in front of me is actually the same is, it is not true. As we sometimes use. Yeah. Right. So another scripture that I go to in all of this, I think just one of my favorite teachings of Jesus that I think is often not appreciated for the insight that it is offering is the parable of the Good Samaritan. And in the parable of the Good Samaritan, it's about helping someone in the need by the side of the road, and those who seem holy and won't stop, and the Samaritan who is the outsider is maybe the person that you wouldn't expect to stop, but they do. But what's so incredible, if you look at this whole story, it's this dialogue that Jesus is having with a lawyer, with an expert in the law. And it's an intra-Jewish conversation. So Jesus is Jewish and he's talking to his fellow his fellow Jew, and they're having a friendly argument or a friendly discussion and about, loving God and then loving the neighbor, and the lawyer wants to justify himself, right? And I love that what Jesus does, there's not really any reason for Jesus to bring up to the Samaritan in this case, unless he has some sense that, this person or these folks really need to hear a message about how you should not only be thinking about the neighbor you can love, but the neighbor you can learn from. And you should not just be thinking about the neighbor that is kind of just a canvas for your helping, that is not just, it doesn't matter who they are, but the neighbor who might have a difference that's kind of difficult for you that you have to face. And so Jesus says, basically saying, go and do likewise. He's saying, go be like this person who is religiously different than you. The Samaritans worshiped on the wrong mountain. They worshiped on Mount Gerizim. They were doing it wrong religiously.
Completely.
And Jesus is saying, go learn from that person who you think is religiously wrong. They're going to teach you how to be a good neighbor. And so that's a big one for me, is telling people, don't just look for the person you're going to go and kind of patronizingly impose your love upon. You're actually being called to go and learn from someone who's different.
Yeah. You and I were talking backstage before the show, and I was talking about being in California. And as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, oh, God has such a great sense of humor. My big thing is love your neighbor, right? I mean, that's all I ever say. And I moved into an apartment complex full of a bunch of crazies. I can say it laughing now, but I have been physically attacked 3 times.
Oh, no.
Good. When I say crazies, I mean crazies. And I think it's kind of funny because through all of this, I have been proud of myself for being restrained. I have been proud of myself for trying to act loving, because man, they make it difficult. Boy, do they make it difficult. And that's where it counts, right? I mean, It is so easy. I mean, half of the building I love. The other half, like I said, I've been physically assaulted. But yet I still have to live with these people. I still have to smile. I still have to be the person that I want and I ask everybody else to be. But boy, is it challenging. Boy, I mean, I used to use it. Oh, like when you're driving. For me now, it's just when I walk out of my apartment. So it's not easy, but that's what's right. That's what Jesus meant. That's what the golden rule is. That's what all of the philosophies say. If we just want to be assholes, don't use God to justify it. Yeah.
And I think the reality is that difference is just not always easy. And we don't get, sometimes it's oh, me and my Jewish friend, and we just we celebrate each other. And that happens sometimes. That's the most beautiful thing.
Totally.
And then it's the people that you live next door to and have to figure out how to share space with, but also take care of yourself, right? Love your neighbor as yourself means love yourself as well. But yeah, that's, it's the hard stuff.
Well, and I, after the assault, I went to the police station to report it, and they told me that it was a felony and this man would go to prison instantly, a minimum sentence of 2 years. And I immediately started crying because this man is 82 years old.
Yeah.
And the cops were like, oh my God, stop crying. I was like, no, I can't do this. I can't do this. I can't. I mean, they first assumed that I was crying because of what had happened, but instead it was, no, I really have to love this guy. I can't say love your neighbor and then let my rage affect this. And not say he's an 82-year-old man, he's nuts, and not accept it for what it was. But it was so hard. I cried. I sat there just crying, going, no, he has to go to, but I couldn't do it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and Sherry, I think you probably know as well as anyone because of the experiences you've come out of in the church. It's so hard to distinguish between where love your enemy is like Christ-like and where it's like encouraging us to just accept abuse. And like
Exactly.
that's what you're
Exactly.
having as an adult having to parse in that experience when you've maybe had experiences of the other thing. And I admire you so much for trying to parse that.
Well, what I did is I took the paperwork and I made copies for my landlord and gave one to the man and said, I have 2 years to press charges. Do not mess with me again. I will not put you in prison now, but do. So I set the boundaries.
Yeah.
I said, you're not going to do this anymore, but I also didn't lash out and say, I mean, I had other neighbors coming up going, put him in jail. I'm like, I'm sorry, I can't.
Yeah.
I can't do it.
Well, and that's, again, clarifying that, right? So then you're showing how love can both be, forgiving, but also boundaried.
Yeah.
Yeah, I admire you.
Pain in the ass, man.
Yeah. You have to go through it.
Yeah, I mean, but that's when it counts. It's so easy to love when you're being loved, when someone's being loving. It's so easy to love your friends, but that doesn't really count. I mean, it counts when you're doing it when it's not really easy. That's how we show. That's how we grow.
Yeah.
And we don't grow without that diversity. We don't, because we don't learn. That's what I was saying earlier. When I find someone different than me, it's like, teach me all of this stuff. That's why I do this show is to every week I learn something and it just broadens. I mean, it puts me in check. Sometimes I go, okay, I was wrong. But it's so beautiful.
Yeah. Well, here, let me then add this like profound insight.
Okay.
And it is it's about the Fast and Furious movies. It's maybe not that profound. So I'm a huge fan of the Fast and Furious movies. And I sometimes describe my job as Fast and Furious, but with religion instead of cars.
Okay.
And so, I don't know if you've seen any of them. I've seen every single one of the movies.
I think I saw like the first 4 or 5, and then I was like, okay, that's enough.
It probably was. But so, they evolved from those early movies, kind of like street races, and then become like espionage thrillers, and they're dropping cars out of cargo planes. And there's even a space car, has a rocket on it, makes it to space. But, of course, the famous thing in these movies is that Dom Toretto, the main character, is always, he's like, I don't have friends, I have family. And, the funny thing about these movies is that the villains eventually end up becoming family. And it's, it's stupid and unbelievable. And yet it's interesting that this idea that like we're enemies that want to kill each other. And then by the next movie, we're like allies. And then by the next movie, we're friends and we're family. It's a very silly example, but it's an example of how in pop culture, like people are drawn to that idea that maybe we don't have to be enemies. Maybe there are more malicious forces that are not human, that we need to vanquish from ourselves, and that if we can find our hope is in finding each other. So that's my quote that I gave you for today. That's what I believe in my heart. And, Fast and Furious, our hope is in finding each other.
The girl, Michelle, I think her real name is, where she pulls the emergency brake and just spins.
Yeah. Michelle Rodriguez. Yeah.
Oh, my son used my Toyota Camry as a demonstration for Fast and the Furious. So that's probably when I stopped watching them.
I can understand that.
Yeah. One of the things that I think is so important in all of this is the fear not, right? It's said so many times in the Bible. And if we didn't fear diversity, we would welcome it. If we didn't have that amphibian fear of everything different from us is a threat, if we switch that up to say everything different from us is a learning opportunity, everything different from us is something to make us grow and to appreciate.
Yeah.
It's more than loving your neighbor, it's honoring them too.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to be like a lot of people I know. That's okay.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to necessarily be friends with everyone. That's okay, because sometimes that's the most loving thing I can do.
Yeah.
But to accept and to honor them, that
Yeah.
is my role. That is my job. And I don't have to like them to do it.
Yeah. I think for me, it's these two twin like versions of loving the neighbor. And one is that version, which is with the maybe the hard personality differences or the hard, um, divisions that have emerged between people. And then I think there's also what I call building tables of unlikeness. So there's those who we're not going to really invite to our table, but we're going to figure out a way to share the world with them and love them. But then I think it's so important that we do cultivate with those who we can share space, these tables of unlikeness, and sharing dinner together, sharing Shabbat to dinner or together, or inviting each other to celebrations together. I'm thinking back to this night I had with my students at UNF. They are like my inspiration, and they give me hope for the world because they're so open to each other. And some are very devout in their tradition, conservative Judaism, Islam, Christianity, and then others non-religious. But they have this mutual curiosity for each other.
Mm-hmm.
And the night that I'm thinking of, it was a mid-spring eve. It was a week after Passover and Easter, and it was in Ramadan. And so we were meeting later on so that the Muslim student could break fast. And the students were just like, their mouths were full at the table. They were passing coffee around and sniffing it, as a gourmet experience. And, some of their heads were covered with scarves or yarmulkes, and their skin along every shade of human. And it was just a table full of joy and unlikeness. And I don't think you have to build a table exactly like that, but I think all of us, to the extent that we can build a table of unlikeness, even if it's just with one other person, who we can get to know, I just think there's so much power in that. And I think that's part of where we shift some of what we saw in these, that video you showed, where we start to break into some of the lives of those people who are stuck in that like mindset, but who maybe we get next to somehow. And it's not going to be all of them. Some of them are still going to be really mad at us and not safe people for us to share meals with. But there might be somebody who's like, oh, I want to have, I actually want to like have coffee with this person and learn more about them. So that's where my hope is in those tables of unlikeness.
Well, and everybody says who gets into any type of service, whether it be religious or community or political, everybody always says, if I can help just that one, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So thinking that you have to help the masses or change the world, well, that's our goal, obviously, but that can be too enormous. That can be too much. So just focus on that one person, right?
Yep. Absolutely.
Just change that one. And I think if we truly understand that love is power, not fear, when we change that dynamic, when we change that motivation, then we can appreciate the diversity. When we are looking from a stance of fear or from a lack of or any of those things, then that diversity does become a threat. It's an imaginary threat,
right?
Just like white supremacy is imaginary,
right?
They're not real. So we have to help people to realize it's all just in our head, and that we really do all put our pants on the same way. We go to the bathroom every day, and we all want to be loved.
Yeah.
From the moment we take our first breath to our last breath, that's what all of us want.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people have that peace, and it's just dormant or just so limited. It's like they're only allowed to spend it on certain people.
Like it's a
And
pie.
yeah, and I think in Florida that's I think what we're in the middle of is it's like with the way that the legislature is working, this law is attacking all kinds of diversity work, and it's just trying to keep people in these lanes of you can only show love to this type of person. We've got to break out of that somehow.
Yeah.
And so that's been my work of the last couple of years. And to use the last year, and to use the Fast and Furious metaphor again, I feel like there's a scene where they drive a car out of a skyscraper across the air into another skyscraper.
In every movie.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do right now, is I'm trying to fly the car out of the one skyscraper. Anyways, my point is,
I love that analogy, though. That is awesome.
We're trying to move the work for, diversity work, trying to bring more of it into the campus community from the outside, because the laws that have been passed and that they're just, they're figuring out how to apply those laws. It's limiting what we're being allowed to do out of political cautiousness.
Yeah.
And so if our community can come in, I've told people all along, we can have a community win if we love our students in this time.
Yeah.
And that's where everybody gets that love, not just that narrow lane of people who fit the right identity.
And in my head, I'm mixing movies. I'm seeing you jump through with your car to the other building, and then Bruce Willis says, "Welcome to the party, pal."
Yeah, absolutely. I can't wait to get there. I can't wait to hear Bruce say that, because it's been a long year.
Yeah. But I mean, that's what it's going to take. It's going to take grabbing someone's hand and saying, "I have a new friend for you to meet." It's exploring. I mean, when I broke the religions down and mentally made a Venn diagram, they all coalesced at love and let go, surrender. Thy will be done, O Lord, all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And then controlling diversity, or controlling the atmosphere that you're in, is the opposite of that. So all of the theologies would say diversity is good, it's welcome, it's godlike.
Mm-hmm.
But then to reel it back and to say, no, is where we have our issues, is where we need to start and say, yes.
Yeah, I feel the responsibility to shape things in that way. We've both seen how Christianity can be used in a lot of different ways. And so I know, and I accept it in my kids as well. And my kids know that they don't have to believe the way that I do. So they don't. And they have expressed that really clearly, but they've also shifted and changed over time, which makes sense to me, because I think all of us do.
Yeah.
So it's been really cool to be able to be a dad in that way to them, and to allow them on that journey to see that what matters to me is that boundary breaking love, and whatever,
exactly,
wherever they find that path to be in that space, I'm happy for them.
That's all I say. If you're walking in love, you're on the right path.
Yep.
Well, we are almost at the top of the hour, Matt. This has been fascinating. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's been great. Thanks, Tim. I've seen you out there. Thanks for sending him my way. Any final words, and where can people find you?
Well, I have a website where I do some writing. It's not anything, no kind of subscription or Substack or anything like that, but I like to write. And so I've got some sermons and essays up there, and that's rmatthartley.com. I am fairly public on X right now, also Matt Hartley. I'm looking at maybe some other platforms like that one, at possibly Threads and Blue Sky, but I like that kind of that type of social media feed. So I spend a lot of time interacting and meeting folks through those venues as well. And
we are live on X right now, so
yeah. I will. Yeah, I think the closing thought Um, I um, I came a couple of years ago to this idea, and I'm trying to write this book, and I'll write it eventually. But um, I really think about diversity in terms of the possibilities of mutuality versus supremacy. And I think for various reasons, we get pulled towards supremacies, and they're religious sometimes, they're national sometimes. Sometimes they can be very personalized in relationships over other people, not just societal. And I see in loving our neighbor and in the possibilities of diversity that mutuality could be the way for us to let go of those supremacies and to see that we all can be a part of that world of mutuality. No one has to be a part of that world of supremacy. Even those who have felt like they have to defend something, I want them to know you don't have to.
Exactly.
There is a freeness in the love that can be shown for anybody, whoever they are, and that includes you. And so I just hope I can share that message with people that we can seek that mutuality together, and we can try to take down these supremacies because they're just not serving us.
Well, I've said since I was a kid that those that brag don't have. So if you have to scream that you're supreme, you obviously have doubts.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Matt, thank you so much. We are going to continue talking to Matt in the VIP show, but for right now, I'm going to send him backstage and close the show. Thank you so much for being
Thanks,
here.
Sherry.
That's his saying, by the way. We forgot to say that. All hope is in finding each other. Another great show. More lessons learned, more aha moments, all of that good stuff. If you like the show, go ahead and share it. Hit that like and subscribe, all of that good stuff. Next week's show, I am trying to put together a Halloween show about witchcraft, but it's like trying to interview Santa on Christmas. So wish me luck. Send a witch my way, or a warlock if you know anyone. I want to talk about all of their beliefs on their day. Thanks again for watching. Have a wonderful week. And as always, don't forget to walk in love. Mwah! See you next week.